Hello and welcome to this Yaspa webinar. My name is Kate Marsden. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer here at Yaspa. We're a London-based fintech, and we are here to discuss a recent survey that we ran across 2,000 UK consumers to talk about the exciting theme of pay by bank or account-to-account payments and how we phrase and talk about it. I'm joined today with great pleasure by Angela Yore, who's founder and CEO of Sky Parlour, and Benjamin Ensor, Director of Research and Strategy at 11FS. I'll give you just a second, both of you, to introduce yourself in a bit more detail and explain your background and history and interest in the particular topic, or the thorny topic of how we phrase pay by bank and account-to-account payments as this particular form of alternative payments technology takes off. So, Angela, over to you. If you could just give us a very quick background, that'd be lovely. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. Thank you, Kate, for the invitation. Very much appreciate it. I actually think this is a really important topic, pay by bank, and how we go forward with getting that consumer adoption. For those of you that don't know me, I've been in the industry for about 20 years now in payments and fintech, both client side, and then started my own company in PR and marketing. And we actually have written a lot on this topic as an agency. And also we've been involved in lobbying, regulators from, doing the PR for the likes of the Payments Association on this topic. A little bit about me. I'm, on the Payments Association's advisory board. I'm also a director of the European Women in Payments Network. And I'm an entrepreneur. I love payments. So much so it's a bit nerdy, but I'll live with that. And I'm very much looking forward to this discussion with you and Benjamin.
Thanks very much. Benjamin, over to you.
Hello, and thank you, Kate, indeed, for inviting me to take part in this. So 11FS is a digital financial services consultancy based in London, but we work with clients all around the world, and we work with firms in payments and banking, in investments and insurance. And my role is Director of Research and Strategy, and I've spent the last 25, getting towards 30 years, researching how new technologies are changing customer behavior, particularly in financial services. How are people responding to new technologies, and what does that mean for the business models of established firms, for new and emerging business models? And what is it that makes people do what they do?
Brilliant. Thank you so much. And that's really introduces the theme very nicely. I've been working in the tech and digital space since the first dot-com boom, so a very, very long time, about 30 years. But I've been in payments probably about 3 years since I joined Yaspa. And it is super exciting to be in a new emerging method or technology or an aspect of payment that is pretty confidently, we can say, is going to see global adoption, but is still very, very much at the beginning. And it reminds me of those very, very early days of the internet, when you knew something exciting was happening. Everybody was playing around with it and coming up with innovative approaches, but no one was quite sure exactly how it was going to take off. In this particular case, we spend at Yaspa a lot of time focusing on that conversion process for our payments, and what happens when we work with a merchant or an operator, and we're putting that Yaspa button on their website alongside a bunch of other different payment options, which might be debit cards or might be buy now, pay later buttons or wallets. There's, as we all know, there's a plethora of options that can occur at a checkout or a payment or within a payment palette. But how we design that button, how we phrase it, what iconography goes on it is really still very much in flux. Our competitors have very, very different approaches to us. And as the brand owner, basically within Yaspa, I really want to make sure that our brand comes through. But more fundamentally, I want to make sure that users who want to choose this method of paying know what it is that they're going to click on. And at the moment, we don't have that clearly set out. Even in the industry, we are calling pay by bank account, account-to-account payments, open banking payments. We call it instant payments here at Yaspa. There's a whole range of names that are being used. And I'm just fascinated to see basically how this is going to play out and what we as different members of the industry in different capacities can do to improve adoption. So, as I mentioned right at the beginning, at Yaspa, we ran a survey right at the beginning of this year, just a few weeks ago, to look at awareness, first of all, of that term pay by bank, to see how many people felt that they understood it in the context of payments. It took a long time even just to phrase the question to make sure that you were making it clear that this was a thing that you wanted to ask them about. Out of that 2,000 number of respondents, 55% yes said yes, they were familiar with it, and 45% no. So that's just over half. Personally, I'm not entirely sure that was necessarily reflective of people's understanding of account-to-account payments or open banking payments. Benjamin, do you have a view? Do you share my skepticism, or do you think it's quite viable?
It is plausible that that proportion of people, 55% of people, have sort of come across the term and are vaguely familiar with it. I think the advantage of the term pay by bank is that it is comprehensible. You can sort of work out what it means, which is a big improvement on some of the other terms like open banking payments, where really you can't work out what is an open banking payment, how does that work? So pay by bank has the advantage that if you say pay by bank to someone, you got a rough idea, okay, this is a payment that involves my bank in some way. I don't know exactly how it works, but I have a rough idea. I was a bit surprised it was quite as high as that, but I think sometimes when you ask people a sort of relatively broad question, have you heard of something? Are you familiar with the phrase? They can say yes. Do you understand how it works and what it means? Well, maybe not. So I was a little bit surprised it was quite so high, pleasantly surprised.
But would you not think that actually anybody who uses their banking app to transact or send money to a colleague or friend or a supplier thinks they're paying by bank anyway?
Well, yeah. So I think that's the rub, isn't it? Is how is pay by bank different from a bank transfer using faster payments, right? So we know that it's different because you're using the open banking protocol, and that it's being initiated by the merchant rather than being initiated by the customer. But that's not necessarily obvious to the customer. So is there a general familiarity with faster payments and bank transfers? Absolutely. Do people understand how something running over the open banking rails works? Well, mostly probably not.
Okay, Angela, what do you think? Were you surprised by that 55% saying yes, they were familiar, or does that seem...
I think I agree with you, Kate, that perhaps people are confusing, that terminology pay by bank has been used, for numerous different ways of paying. Banks use it, you see it, it's been going for years. So I don't think they necessarily connect it to paying, using open banking or accounts count or anything like that. Does it matter? I think for the adoption, it probably does matter. I think that open banking and the CMA 9, that were forced really into this area of open banking, have not put any money behind the branding. There isn't a brand. In fact, that's why the industry is making up a brand. People like yourselves are adopting and creating brands. You might be the ones that get the cut through in the same way that Klarna did with buy now, pay later. But there's no above the line marketing activity or spend to do it. So I think that's one of the challenges. But I think that it will get adopted because it's a lot cheaper for merchants to use than using MasterCard or Visa or Amex or any of the card schemes. But some of the downsides are, of course, it's not quite as indemnified for the consumer, and the consumer isn't aware of that. So yes, I'm surprised. I think there's work to do to improve from a PR and marketing perspective on how we adopt a term holistically, and not just in the UK, but you think about it that, other countries around the world, 190 countries or whatever in the world, they've got their own schemes doing the same thing. And some of them have been more successful. And maybe we can lend to in terms of VIX in South America, maybe we can learn from what they're doing. So there is use cases out there that we can actually look at.
No, absolutely. And we certainly at Yaspa, we have customers across the UK and Europe. And I'm very conscious that creating a button that says pay by bank, for example, in the UK, if we translated that necessarily into Dutch or to Italian, then we can obviously translate it literally. That's not a problem. But is it necessarily going to work? And then that, of course, then brings up the question as symbols and iconography, and would that be a simpler, more comprehensive approach, but then again requires a lot of education and backing beyond little Yaspa doing our thing.
But I think, Kate, that's a really, really important point, is it's not only the name, it's also the iconography, because it's about recognition. It's about when a customer comes across it for the second time or the third time or the fourth time, they look at it and say, oh yeah, I've done this before. When we think about vending machines or car park, we all go around, where you park in the UK, and, there's sometimes a different operator in each town's got a different, am I already registered to this one or not? It's a bit of a palaver. The consistency is really important to sort of customer experiences. So if there is a standard logo, people start to recognize it. Now, if we look back at contactless payments, when Visa and MasterCard brought it in, initially there wasn't a logo, and then they kind of agreed a logo. Now, much easier between two schemes, much easier when you got mandate stuff. But, they got that logo in place, and they quite quickly got to, okay, we're going to call it contactless payments, which, like paid by bank, is self-explanatory. I can kind of work out, okay, it's contactless, so I kind of not making contact. I can kind of understand what that is. So you get that familiarity. And then, of course, we had the Oyster card payments in London, which meant it took off quicker in London. There was one of the northern cities as well, I think it was Manchester or somewhere else, where else, again, there was some contactless transport. So people kind of understood how it worked. And you got that takeoff because you had that iconography and that standard name. So I think you're making a really, really important point, Kate, is yes, we need not only a standard name in the UK, but ideally a standard name that's working around the world. And you're also right that the industry is sort of coalescing around paid by bank a little bit, for all that you're quite right, Angela, that that also means other things.
I think it's a really good point that you bring up, and one that I was going to make as well. I think, we need some standardization, across the industry, and where it's been done well in payments has definitely been when you had that use case, Oyster use case. It was so huge. It was many millions of people going through the London Underground system that gave it that repetition, and that whole thing in marketing, the rule of 7. If you see something 7 times, it becomes part of your understanding. It becomes part of your frame of reference. So I think that's the other thing that we actually need, is we need one big use case. And also, great examples that you brought up. One is, another one from me would be the top up logo, the green logo that everybody knew, that in the days before, mobile phones were new and we didn't all have contracts. You had that top up sign. You saw it in the supermarkets. Oh. You saw it everywhere. Yeah. The same goes with wireless. Wireless and contactless is a similar sign, but, we understand them and they're simple, and it gives you that nudge marketing to act in a certain way. Psychologically, it makes you act. So, it's needed. I think the industry and companies such as yours, Kate, that at Yaspa, where you're making a splash, in this area, hopefully like this survey will get people thinking about it more, and you'll get some eyes on it, that you actually gone to the trouble of spending money to do this, to actually increase awareness.
Banks, though, this is absolutely not to malign the banks, but the banks, in my understanding, actually were obviously obligated to
Yes,
move down the route of open banking, and it's not. I mean, actually, from their personal, or not, from their side, their remuneration from a payment made through open banking is
there's no commercial model.
There's no
right
commercial
now.
incentive.
Yes,
really,
that's different from credit cards, where there's interchange fees, and there's a bit. That's why they can indemnify it with the chargebacks process, which enables consumers to get their money back. So there's still some flaws, but what we are seeing something exciting, as you said, happening, which will change consumer behavior over time and is doing in other countries. So it's happening, and it will and as you say, people are beginning to recognize it. So that will continue on. But do we want to lead? Do we need more leadership in our sector to actually, these are the areas that are broken, to fix them? And I think, perhaps your survey will help to, forge a path for a solution.
I think your point about use cases is absolutely spot on, because lots of people will be paying by this method. They'll have been paying their HMRC bill at the end of January, often without realising. In fact, I spoke to a friend the other day and I was explaining how we worked. And she said, "Ooh, like I paid yesterday on HMRC." And I'm like, yes, that was it. But she was unable to articulate the name of that method that she paid by. And I had to say, yes, that's it. That's exactly how it works. Okay, so question 2 was, within the last year, have you made a payment for goods or services that has required you to scan a QR code with your smartphone? And in total, 27% of the respondents said yes. Now, as we know, on some open banking deployments, it requires a scanning with your phone, particularly if you're doing a lot of desktop, for example. But also there are other payment methods. For example, if you're in a restaurant that might has a QR code printed on your placemat or menu. So it's not just open banking, but it does show that people are certainly far more familiar than they used to be with using their phone to make a payment. But the people who said yes was definitely higher amongst millennials and Gen Zs, which is what you would expect. I don't think there's much then that's surprising on that response in terms of who's used their phone and scanned a QR code to make a payment.
No, I mean, young people being more enthusiastic about technology is not news. That's probably been true since, I don't know, the 11th century or whenever. I think what's interesting about QR codes is you can potentially use a QR code to initiate an open banking payment or a pay-by-bank payment. So, actually these are not competing. They're complementary technologies. I suppose what we haven't really talked about, though, is the consumer incentive to use these payments. Because Angela, you've touched on the use cases, but you've also sort of said, we're going to see growing adoption. Well, I think whether we see growing adoption depends a bit on the use cases and depends a bit on creating more incentive for customers. Because right now, pay-by-bank payments work really, really well in some scenarios, and they don't work so well in other scenarios. And I think that's one of the challenges for the industry. Kate, you're absolutely right about the need for a consistent name and the consistent brand. But there's also, to your point, Angela, some thought that needs to go into how do we make the use cases more compelling for customers so that not only do they recognize it and think about using it again, but they actually actively want to use it again.
I think with the QR code, the defining moment there was COVID. It was massive for the QR code. It's a technology that's been around for decades, Japanese technology that really wasn't being used. And then it found its use case. And from that, restaurants and other merchants realized this is great. We can we can have less staff at going up and down to tables. We can reduce our operating costs. And actually, the millennials and Gen Zs love it. They'd much rather do that than talk to a human being. So I think, we'll see future adoption based on demographics. But what we'd need to also be careful of with pay by bank is that we also that we don't forget the digital excluded who potentially might not use it. And so, it will certainly got great legs, but, we still have to remember it's a bit like when analog TVs moved to digital, there's lots of still older people that didn't have that digital box, which, there's a transition period. We're nowhere near that right now. We're in the infancy, but it's still something that, all of these things need a vision, and a roadmap. And that's where, going back to, I think what we're all saying is my call to, I'll talk for myself, my call to arms is I'd like to see a stronger leadership in this area.
Your point about inclusion is absolutely right. So, although the sample size is quite small on the top and the bottom of the demographic scales, the Gen Z said 47% had, yes, they'd made a purchase with a QR code, but only 10% of generation born between 1928 and 1945 said yes. So that would probably be sort of the over 80s, basically, and 90% hadn't. And that in the baby boomers is a very similar split, actually. So it is very easy for us to get all very excited about the new stuff, but it's super important that we remember what the experience needs to be like for everybody across the banking ecosystem.
Can I disagree on that? Not because I'm saying that there are segments of society that are not important, but because pay-by-bank payments are an alternative to other ways to pay. So exclusion becomes a problem if we get merchants who say you can only pay this way. Now, if it happens to be HMRC that says you can only pay that way, well, lots of people will be quite happy if they don't end up paying their tax. But the exclusion's only a problem if we've got merchants who are saying this is the only way you can pay and you cannot pay in other ways. That's when the exclusion becomes an issue. Provided merchants are offering multiple ways to pay, it's, this is just all to the good, right? Having multiple options is just good news for consumers. And if there's some consumers who choose not to use it, that's fine. It becomes an exclusion when a merchant says this is the only way you can pay and you cannot use our services unless you embrace this technology.
Point, and one well made as well. But I think sometimes what happens is when we see, the digitization of life, we also see that other forms of methods, tend to become obsolete. So but I think you're completely right in what you're saying, Benjamin.
I mean, a good example would be car parks, right? If you could only pay for a car park with pay-by-bank payments, that would be great for Yaspa, perhaps, but it would lead a lot of people saying, how do I pay?
Yes, we did have, in our early days, in our defense, but one particular customer who did use us to provide open banking payments, and we were the sole payment method. And that is obviously great. It's a carrot and stick thing, isn't it? So you're pushing people to use us, and that creates that 7 times, adoption, and improves habituality, gets people used to the method. So it will inevitably be a combination. And we were very pleased at the time because people of all demographics were using us to make their payments through Yaspa. But of course, we don't know who looked at it and thought, oh my goodness, this is a method that I simply is just too daunting for me. So it's a challenge. Certainly, though, from our perspective, when we look at the demographics of the people who use our merchants and our customers' services, then they generally tend towards the younger age group. And really, I think we just want to encourage adoption as much as possible. And we work very closely with our merchants to do that. I'm just going to move on to the third question, which was just about, so this is very quick, actually. This was about just familiarity with different terms in the open banking space. The first was account-to-account payments, and on average, 50% said they'd heard of it, they were familiar with it. 28%, if I've read this correctly, had heard of open banking, but more had skewed to the millennial and Gen Z area. A reassuring 83% had heard of BACS, which for someone of my generation is very, very reassuring. It's how everything used to be paid. But that splits very dramatically, actually, between the millennial and the Gen Z generation. And that's presumably because from sort of the millennials onwards, they're beginning to be house owners and paying, bills and whatever. Whereas right at the younger generation, they're still less familiar with that. Faster payments. That was just, we tried that question just in case. 55% said they were familiar. And then just 7% had never heard of any of those terms. The BACS payment is interesting just in terms of VRPs and the recurring payment method that will come eventually through open banking. And I think we're all expecting that methods of recurring payments or paying bills, whether by BACS or by direct debit, will be replaced in the VRP by VRPs at some point, and that will be facilitated by the open banking infrastructure. I don't think there was anything super surprising in that. Benjamin, was there anything that struck you from those responses?
I was actually surprised how many people had heard of Bax. I always think Bax is
Really?
one of those sort of quite arcane pieces
Oh,
of the payment
no.
system that you almost shouldn't need to know about. But I suppose you're right, if you're doing a large mortgage payment or something. But it's,
Yeah.
to me, Bax is part of the plumbing that maybe doesn't, people shouldn't have to know about. Anytime there's acronyms, you think, this is where the industry is kind of, losing the plot a little bit when you start using acronyms to communicate things. Does anyone know what BAC stands for? I mean, obviously people do, but so I was surprised. I was also surprised that faster payments is as well known as it is, because again, do consumers actually see that name or see that brand? So, great. I was surprised. I was actually surprised open banking was as high as 28%. I suppose there's quite a lot of people who actually work in the financial services industry in this country. Maybe about 10% of people.
Maybe the keen survey completers, maybe. Also, Angela, was there anything there that surprised you?
With respect, Benjamin, I'm not surprised. And the reason why I'm not surprised is because Bax did, the actual brand, it is a brand, number one, and it has a trademark. And also, it's on the back of most utility bills, and it's used, there's big use cases for it. And also that there was a huge amount of marketing spend going behind that recognition. So I think they've not done that. That's kind of my point up front. They've not done that with open banking, and there isn't a trademark. But it is in its infancy compared to Bax that's been around, like you say. It's part of our critical infrastructure, and it's been around for many, many years. And perhaps that's where it has the advantage. And maybe we should look at, pay by bank and think, actually, it hasn't done bad considering it's only been around a few years. But, I do believe Bax is actually quite a strong brand. And I'm pretty sure if I asked anyone in my family what it was, most people would know. But like you say, perhaps people that have got responsibilities and that are paying bills and things like that. But, that starts pretty young, doesn't it? As soon as people that go to university by 19, 20, they might be living in a flat and paying bills, or, kids are not leaving home as quickly as they used to. But I think by the time they're in their mid-20s, they've got bills that they're paying. So, yeah, it's a fascinating topic.
Who, on the Bax thing, well, I can take this offline, but who funded basically that campaign then, and who trademarked it?
It wasn't the PSR. I can't remember. Actually, I can't remember exactly what the name of the company was, but it was part of the regulator that actually funded that. So it was, ultimately it was funded by the government.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. Okay. So a final question was, what are the 3 most important factors you consider when choosing how to pay online? 72% said security, 66% said ease, 47% said speed, which is one that we like because we're all about instant payments and fast payments. Then it was familiarity, 32%, points and rewards, 16%, flexible payment terms, 13%, and loyalty, that would really be either to the brand or the payment method, at 7%. So again, to us, bearing in mind all the other research we've done, security, ease and speed coming as the top 3 components seems quite an unsurprising result. Certainly we have looked, and I know that other TPPs or third-party payment providers like ours have looked at loyalty points or reward points and things like that to, again, incentivize or encourage take-up and trialing of banking payments, but that is clearly not a major driver. Was there anything in that, Benjamin, that surprised you when you looked at it in terms of the results?
I think what's really important is actually the use case, the scenario, the thing that the customer is trying to pay for, because that has a huge effect on what matters to them, and then also which payment method they'll choose. So if I'm paying £10 for something or £15 for something, I may not be that worried about security. I may not, I'm really going to focus on speed and ease. And same thing if I'm in a supermarket or a convenience store. If I'm paying a small amount, just make it quick, make it easy. As soon as I'm paying a larger amount, or maybe I'm buying something from a merchant I've not bought from before, and so on, suddenly security becomes a lot more important to me. We didn't and notice you didn't ask about cost, because implicitly payment systems are free to consumers. In practice, of course, we all know they're not free to operate, and actually, they cost money. And effectively the merchant is subsidizing the cost of that. Implicitly, the sort of loyalty and rewards is actually trying to tilt that cost equation a little bit in favor of the customer and give them some more incentives. So no, I wasn't surprised, but I think the way that each of us thinks about how we pay for something, even if it's almost an instinctive choice that we don't necessarily actively make, hinges on what is it that we're paying for, because that thing we're paying for, and whether we've dealt with that merchant before, and whether it's physical goods we're getting or a service, whether we've already got the thing, or all of that really determines which things are important to us in that moment. And so I think these factors vary very much depending on what the transaction is.
I would agree. Angela?
I just looked up who brought BACS into effect, and it was Pay UK. And Pay UK are, government-owned organisation. So what matters in payments, I think, is very much, and that's why I love your survey so much, that you broke it down by demographics, because I think it very much depends on what demographic you're in. Nowadays, from very young, people have access to a card, through the likes of the Gen Z options that became available for 12-year-olds. That the Go Henrys is the obvious one, but there's others that most of the banks came out with as well. So I think that, your risk is less important to you when you're younger, and you may not necessarily understand the ramifications either. As you start to get older and have more responsibility, and money, with that with that power of money, that comes responsibility as well. Then I think, up the scale, fraud and risk become, more important to you. And also you become more vulnerable as you get older as well. Physically, you become more vulnerable because you're not able to do the same things as you were when you were 15. So I think there's a lot of psychology behind what you want. And, when you're 15 and you want to, buy something, a new t-shirt, you want it now. When you're, transferring, I don't know, a few £1,000s to a relative when you're retired, you want to make sure that money gets to them. So similar points to you, really, Benjamin. I think, but I do think that's why, we have to think about all of those items, as the payments industry, again, coming back to leadership, that we have to cross all the I's and all the T's for all the demographics. We have the responsibility to do that. And we can. And, Yaspa is a great example of a company that, in the future could be one of our big techs. And some of the stuff that's happening and is confused around regulation and, where decisions aren't being made, it might be the big techs that are actually coming up with the terminology. Like, you might be making the cut through before the regulators even get round to it. Or so, let's hope that that's the case for you. And, that would be wonderful. So that we start, adopting that term, Yaspa, for pay by bank, and it becomes synonymous with that. I'm sure you would love that. And,
Angela, I absolutely would love that. Yeah, you just done my full marketing job for me. It's fantastic. Yeah. I'll Yaspa you some money.
Thinking along the same lines as you, although I'm very much, a payments person through and through, and had a similar job to you, back in the day before I started my company. I also always think, about the audiences, and I'm not sure always that happens, in all the important spheres of the decision making.
I feel very privileged to be working back in a company our size, growing as we are and innovating as we are, and it being our decisions, basically, how we're building these products and bringing them to market. It's really, as I said, I've been in this industry, or rather the tech industry, for a very long time, but it is really, really exciting to be in a space at this stage of growth where it is all to play for, basically, and you feel that you are crafting and helping push the industry and adoption forward. It is super exciting. conscious of time, so there are a couple of things I just wanted to ask you, which one of which was more generally, is there anything else you'd want to say about the adoption of open banking payments or pay by bank and how we drive it forward? And then very specifically, do you think pay by bank is the right name, at least in English in the UK? So Benjamin, more generally, is there anything else or any other comments that you feel it's important to raise?
So more generally, I think there's actually a lot of work to do to make pay by bank payments more compelling. They work brilliantly in some scenarios today, but if we really want to drive more widespread adoption, I think there's a lot of work to be done to sort of improve the customer experience and make sure that those flows are really seamless. Some of that hinges on the banks and the back end. I think there's a lot of work to be done to fully mandate variable recurring payments. That would make a huge difference to a lot of different sectors. You know, you mentioned bill payments earlier. Yeah, let's fully mandate variable recurring payments because, you know, right now they only work in the financial services industry, which is sort of ironic given that banks have been kind of slowing things down in some respects. We need clearer customer protection. It was interesting, Martin Lewis has sort of picked up on that, is actually starting to discourage people from using pay by bank. But he's right in the sense that, you know, if you're making a big payment, you do need to think about what happens if something goes wrong. If you're paying HMRC, that's fine. But if you're paying a big merchant you've never come across before for something, you know, so there's a number of things like that. The processes for merchants, things like how do we handle chargebacks, things like that, that the longer you look at it, the more you think, I can see what Visa and MasterCard have done. People sort of tend to beat up Visa and MasterCard a bit, but actually when you look at it, there's a lot of good work that those organizations have done over 20, 30 years, whatever you think of them. Those payment systems do work quite well. And for pay by bank to compete with that, ironically, some of those same features may need to be gradually added if we want pay by bank to be used in more scenarios. And then to come to your direct question, what's the best name for it? I think the best name for it is something that people can recognize and something that can become ubiquitous. I think that probably is either pay by bank or just possibly instant bank payments. But pay by bank has the momentum behind it. It's the one that I'm seeing more and more of the industry using, both in this country and in other English-speaking countries. So I think probably that ship is sailing. Is there a better alternative like instant bank payments? Is that better? I'm not sure. But I completely agree with you. We need to standardize on a single term, and we need a brand and a logo so that people recognize it, because recognition is really crucial to trust. And if we want people to trust this for large payments, they need to recognize, oh yeah, I've done this before. It's safe. It's secure. Great.
Perfect. Thank you. Angela, the wider question about improving adoption?
Yeah. What brands do where the brand name is synonymous with the action? Which great ones can you think of? Xerox. I worked for Xerox. I'm going to Xerox something. Hoover, back in the day, Hoover wasn't. It was a brand. It wasn't the action, but it became synonymous with the action. Monzo's, to a degree, is starting to be used. So, Yaspa. Why not Yaspa as a way of doing it? Or VIX. VIX is really cool. VIX. Why don't we globally adopt the word VIX? But I agree with, the schemes do it well. But they've got the commercial model to do it well. And they also have a vested interest in open banking and are buying up many of the open banking companies, like, for example, Tink and others. So, I think there's all to play at here. Like, this is one area that we'll be talking about, for years to come.
Okay. And specifically, the pay by bank phrase, would you run with that, or do you think that's an alternative? Well, apart from Yaspa, which you're championing brilliantly, so thank you for that.
It's okay. I would say we want something a bit more, think of the emoji world. Think of the, the slang that, I say my 19-year-old and all his friends say, things are sick, they're whatever. I think that saying what it is on the tin is not going to make it catchy. So I would argue for, if this was a debate and Benjamin was on one side and I was on the other, I would argue for a really catchy phrase, or perhaps one powerful word that would, give it that resonance and cut through. But that's again the marketing head talking here. So I do apologise, everybody.
So sick payments. You heard it here first.
Let's go with it. I like it. Let's get down with the kids.
God, I've got 2 teenage boys who would be astonished if their mother was involved in driving something like this forward. Anyway, thank you very much, both Angela and Benjamin, for your contributions on this. It was really an absolute pleasure to talk to you both. I think that's it for now. We will be putting out the report and would love to have everybody's input, and hope that lots of people will be able to download and read it, and love the feedback on it. I really hope that this is the index is something that we'll do every year, basically, until we don't need to do it, because we all know exactly what it is we're talking about. And this very much was coming at it from a linguistic perspective. I'm just really super interested in how we help drive something like this forward, and would love to have the input of all of our listeners, and get everybody's feedback, because it's at a really exciting stage. So thank you very much, Angela. Thank you very much, Benjamin. And
thank you, Kate, for the opportunity. Appreciate it.